Frank DeLuca powered his neighborhood through a blackout, only to be slapped with a $2,000 fine by HOA President Janice Crowley, who envied his preparation. But Frank had one move she didn't expect. He partnered with the town to make his generator a critical energy asset. What happened next turned the entire power dynamic upside down. Just wait until you hear how justice finally prevailed in this battle. The ice storm came in fast, blanketing Shelby, North Carolina, in layers of frozen glass. Tree limbs snapped like twigs, power lines sagged, then gave out entirely. Within hours, the town was plunged into darkness. Nearly every home on Larkspur Drive sat cold and silent, except one. At the far end of the street, a small brick ranch house stood warm and lit, a low hum rising steadily from behind it. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and wood polish. The fridge buzzed. Medical devices blinked. That house belonged to Frank DeLuca. 52 years old, an electrical engineer with over 2 decades at Duke Energy, Frank was known around town as the quiet neighbor who always had a project in the garage. Years before, he'd watched storms cripple the grid and vowed not to be caught unprepared. So, he had built his solution, a commercial-grade generator wired to a bank of solar-charged batteries, tucked discreetly behind his home. Everything had been permitted, inspected, and approved, twice. Frank knew the regulations as well as anyone. When the storm hit, his first instinct wasn't to gloat. It was to help. By the second night, elderly neighbors were knocking on his door, shivering, worried about medication and oxygen machines. Frank ushered them inside without hesitation. Soon, he was running a quiet shelter. Extension cords trailed from his garage to power an iron lung for Mr. Garvey down the block. A neighbor's diabetic son kept his insulin chilled in Frank's refrigerator. Others came to charge phones and warm up over cups of instant soup. Frank didn't see this as charity. It was simply what neighbors did. On the 4th day, with the storm beginning to lift but the grid still crippled, there was a sharp knock at his door. Frank opened it to find Janice Crowley, the HOA president, standing beneath a crisp umbrella. In one hand, she clutched a clipboard. In the other, a steaming travel mug. Her smile was practiced. "Good morning, Mr. DeLuca," she began in a voice polished for board meetings. "I hope you're staying safe." Frank raised a brow. "We're doing fine, thanks. Can I help you?" Janice's eyes flicked toward the side of the house where the generator's muffled hum was still audible. "We've received multiple complaints," she said smoothly, "about noise and about improper equipment use." Frank stood straighter. "The generator is legal. It's permitted and compliant. The county inspector signed off on it personally." Her smile didn't fade. "Our HOA guidelines are quite clear regarding industrial machinery, visible or audible from neighboring lots." She tapped her clipboard. "Regardless of county permits." Frank's jaw tightened. He knew the rules, and he also knew this was pure pettiness. "I'm using this to keep people safe," he said evenly. "It's an emergency." Janice's smile widened, cool and unbothered. "You'll find a violation notice in your mailbox. $2,000, payable in 10 days. For a long moment, Frank said nothing. He simply stared at her, as though trying to process what he'd heard. They were fining him for powering life-saving equipment, for offering shelter when the entire street had gone dark. Before he could reply, Janice turned crisply on her heel and walked away, the umbrella bobbing gently above her. Frank closed the door, heart pounding. He looked over at the neighbors huddled in his living room. Mrs. Lee, Mr. Garvey, the young mother with the diabetic child. "They're fining me," he said quietly, "for helping you." A deep silence settled in the room, then a ripple of quiet outrage. Frank exhaled slowly. If they thought this was over, they were about to learn otherwise. Part 2, hatred, expanded. The storm might have passed, but the fallout had just begun. Word spread fast. Within 24 hours of Janice's visit, a new email from the Larkspur HOA landed in every resident's inbox. Subject line, "Maintaining community standards in difficult times." Frank opened it on his laptop, eyes narrowing with each line. It was thinly veiled, but the target was obvious. We remind all residents that the use of unauthorized, unsightly, or disruptive equipment undermines the harmony of our neighborhood. Reckless operation of such devices is not only inconsiderate, but may also violate HOA regulations. Compliance actions will be pursued as necessary. Beneath the corporate phrasing, the message was clear. Frank DeLuca had broken their harmony. The backlash from Frank's neighbors, however, was swift, and it wasn't aimed at him. By that evening, Mrs. Lee came by with a casserole and a hug. "This is shameful," she whispered. "You kept us alive, Frank." Others stopped him on the street, in driveways, at the local market. "Don't pay it. She's targeting you because her house was cold. We're with you." And it was true. Janice's house had sat dark and freezing for days. Multiple residents had seen her struggling with battery lanterns. Some even whispered she had approached a neighbor about borrowing a generator, only to be told Frank's was the only working system on the street. Rather than admit her own lack of preparation, she had chosen a different path: attack the one man whose foresight had helped others. The final straw came when a neighbor showed Frank a second HOA email, sent privately to board members and accidentally forwarded to several residents. "It is imperative we enforce this rule. Otherwise, we risk setting a dangerous precedent for noncompliance." The word dangerous stuck with Frank. He had done nothing dangerous. He had helped. When the next HOA board meeting was announced, Frank decided to fight the fine head on. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a beige, overly air-conditioned room where folding chairs creaked and stale coffee steamed in foam cups. Frank arrived early, carrying a binder of county permits, emails from the utilities department, and photos of the generator, legal, permitted, quiet. When his turn came, he stood and spoke clearly. "The generator was legally installed and necessary during a declared emergency. I helped neighbors stay safe. Fining me for that is not only wrong, it may be illegal." The room was silent for a beat. A few neighbors nodded quietly, but Janice, seated at the center of the long folding table, did not flinch. She lifted her clipboard with deliberate calm and began to read. "Section 14B of the Larkspur HOA bylaws prohibits unsightly mechanical devices and disruptive noise, regardless of circumstances. The board maintains that the generator is both visible and audible from neighboring lots." Her voice never wavered. "The board votes to uphold the fine, 5-0. Frank stood there for a long moment, binder still in hand. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, some sympathetic, some wary. Without another word, he closed the binder and walked out. Outside, beneath a crisp winter sky, Frank stood by his truck for a moment, breathing slowly. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. They had made their choice. They weren't going to be reasonable. They wanted a fight. They were about to get one. He slid into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and drove home, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Frank barely slept that night. Long after the house had gone quiet and the neighbors had returned home, he sat at his kitchen table beneath the soft glow of a single lamp. The binder lay open before him. Next to it sat his laptop, humming faintly, its screen filled with municipal codes, HOA bylaws, and state energy regulations. If Janice Crowley wanted a petty fight over community harmony, she had picked the wrong man to target. Frank's mind moved like a grid of circuits, each piece of information connecting to another. Step 1. Confirm the legal foundation. He dug out the original permit for his generator installation, stamped, signed, fully approved by the county's Department of Building and Energy. Then he cross-referenced the latest county energy codes. Buried within them, under a subsection few homeowners would ever bother to read, was precisely what he'd suspected. Privately owned auxiliary generation systems operating under county permit during declared emergencies shall be recognized as critical infrastructure and shall not be subject to override by subordinate private covenants or regulations. Frank leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing. There it is. The HOA fine wasn't just petty, it was potentially unlawful. But Frank wasn't about to stop with legal arguments alone. He opened his contacts list and began dialing. Years at Duke Energy had earned him more than just technical skills. They had built a network. Engineers, regulators, even members of the town's utilities commission. Within 2 days, Frank had spoken with 3 key people, one of whom confirmed something he hadn't known. The Shelby Town Council was preparing to launch a pilot program aimed at partnering with local private power producers, especially for emergency resilience. Frank's solar array and generator combo wasn't just compliant, it was perfectly positioned to fit the program. 2 days later, he sat across from a city utilities coordinator at a modest government office downtown. "This is exactly the kind of system we want," the official said, flipping through Frank's technical diagrams. "You've already got the infrastructure, and the capacity is there. We'd like to move forward, provisionally at first." Frank signed the papers that afternoon. Under the new agreement, his system would be designated as an emergency auxiliary power asset, with contractual language shielding it from interference by private entities, including HOAs. Even better, during periods when the grid required additional capacity, Frank would receive monthly compensation for supplying power back to the town. It was more than a win. It was a fortress. But one step remained. Frank drafted a letter with deliberate precision and sent it via certified mail to the Larkspur HOA. Attention, President Janice Crowley. Effective immediately, my home power system is under contract with the Town of Shelby Public Utilities Department as a registered auxiliary energy asset. Any attempt by private entities to interfere with its operation may constitute obstruction of critical infrastructure and will be reported to state energy regulators and the county legal office. Frank read the letter twice, satisfied. Then he sealed it and sent it. The next move belonged to Janice, and this time she would be playing on his field. The reaction from the HOA came faster than Frank expected. At the next monthly board meeting, the usual air of quiet formality had been replaced by a nervous tension. More residents than usual had turned up, many of them sitting in folding chairs near the back with folded arms and watchful eyes. Janice Crowley arrived late. Her usual polished smile was noticeably absent. When it came time for board announcements, she stood, visibly rattled, and read from a prepared statement in a clipped voice. "We acknowledge that Mr. Frank DeLuca's home power system is now registered as an auxiliary energy asset under contract with the town of Shelby. The HOA will take no further action regarding the matter." She said no more. The fine was dead. The fight, at least on paper, was over. But the real twist was yet to come. Just 2 months later, another brutal storm rolled through the Carolinas. Freezing rain snapped power lines, flooded transformers, and darkened homes across Shelby once again. This time, Frank's generator wasn't just humming for his own household. Through the new municipal agreement, his system had been wired into the town's emergency response network. As outages swept across the grid, Frank's stored solar power and generator output were automatically routed to priority zones, local fire stations, emergency shelters, and even the downtown warming center. At sunrise, camera crews arrived on Larkspur Drive. "Local engineer's home power system helps town weather another blackout," the anchor announced, as images of Frank's modest ranch house filled TV screens across Shelby. Neighbors watched with pride. More than a few sent congratulatory texts or stopped by to shake Frank's hand. And Janice? She didn't even show her face at the next board meeting. Word had spread about the news segment, about the town contract, about how one resident had done more good for Shelby than the entire HOA board combined. Her reputation was in tatters. Soon, the residents began organizing. The same people who had once grumbled privately about petty fines and overreach now spoke openly. A petition circulated calling for sweeping changes to HOA leadership. By the time spring elections rolled around, the result was decisive. Janice and 2 of her closest allies were voted out entirely. New board members promised a more reasonable approach, one that prioritized service over control. As for Frank, he kept his generator running, quietly, steadily, and each month a check from the town of Shelby arrived in his mailbox, a well-earned symbol of resilience and civic value. The man they had once tried to fine for helping his neighbors was now powering half the grid when it mattered most. And the HOA? They had learned a lasting lesson. think twice before messing with an engineer, especially one who knows exactly how the system works.